Good afternoon and welcome to the Lawrence Parks and Recreation Lifelong Travel Show. Thank you for joining us on Zoom. Hopefully, with the optimism that we're planning our trips, we will all be off of Zoom soon and seeing each other in person. If you have any questions, we're going to handle those at the end of our presentation through the chat. But let's just get started looking at what's coming up for the next 6 months. There's a few things that are new since we last traveled and a few things that are familiar. One thing is that detailed registration forms will be available in all of the recreation centers. If you were invited to this show, you either received an email attachment or some paper in the mail that has a summary of all of the trips, but detailed forms will be available. It may be a little later on Wednesday when they get there, depending on the weather and the snow that we have coming in. I wanted to go over the vehicles that we have available because it depends on the trip. We do have a department bus that holds on average 20 people, and that is what we take on most day trips. We do rent a motor coach for overnight travel and long distance travel. If the group turns out to be very small for an overnight trip, we will use the department bus, but if that change is made, you'll be notified before we make the final plans. We also now have a 15-passenger van that's available for very local trips and field trips. It's a nice 15-passenger van. It's not like the old ones where you had to kind of duck under the seat belts. It has an aisle down the middle, and I'm able to stand up in it, so it's fairly comfortable. Excuse me, that's an error. Guaranteed share is something we've always offered, and that essentially means that if you want to pay for a double, you're willing to share a hotel room, but you don't have anyone to share it with, you can sign up before the early bird deadline and ask for a guaranteed share. That means I can pair up people who have requested it, and you'll receive contact information for each other beforehand, so you can at least chat and talk about any concerns you have about sharing a room. I do ask that you be a good roommate if you're going to ask for the guaranteed share, not somebody who stays up all night or sleeps with the TV on and that sort of thing. But that is something we are still offering. Travel coverage. We used to be able to get group coverage through Travel Insured, but needless to say, the travel insurance company really got hit by COVID, and they no longer offer group coverage. They do allow people to get individual travel policies, but I can tell you that I did a little test using my husband as a guinea pig, and they wanted $85 to cover a 2-day trip. So what I will do is, in the event that you have to cancel at the last minute, and I'm talking for emergencies, illness, my house flooded, the basement's full of water, that sort of thing, I will do my best to contact the vendors and see where I can get some money back and give that credit to your account. But I cannot provide 100% travel insurance any longer. Wait lists haven't changed, but I want to encourage people to use them. If a trip fills up quickly, don't hesitate to sign up for the wait list. There's no cost to the wait list. There's no obligation to the wait list, but it does mean that if somebody cancels, first call goes to the top person on the wait list. And people do cancel, life changes. And so don't miss the opportunity to sign up for a wait list. And talking about things change, COVID, everything that I have planned today and am presenting has an asterisk on it. We will do our best to adjust our plans to local guidelines and cancel if a destination cancels on us completely. If we can't find an alternate destination, then we just have to respond. But I can tell you that we will follow whatever local COVID guidelines are in place. Right now, Lawrence Parks and Recreation is in yellow, and that means as far as travel, we would ask that you wear a mask on the bus, and then we would follow the expectations at our destination. Finally, just a comment about the travel letter. I am presenting dates and general times today. The absolute final details are set about 2 weeks ahead of time, and that's because restaurants go out of business. It takes me more time to load 40 people than to load 20 people. So you will always receive a travel letter 7 to 10 days ahead of time that give you the final details of where are we meeting, what time are we meeting, when are we departing, all of those sorts of things. So again, general information today, but you can always call and ask me for more details. Let's get started. The first thing is I thought we needed some fun. And so we're going to the New Theater Restaurant on Wednesday, March 9th. And it's going to be dinner and a show. And it's going to be a comedy. Don't Dress for Dinner is just your madcap comedy of mistaken identity, secret lovers, antics will ensue. And there's always good food at the New Theater. So this will be a low-key, just relaxing afternoon. We'll leave around 11 o'clock and we get back by about 4:30 generally. The one thing I have to be real clear about with the New Theater trip is it is Wednesday, March 9th, which means my deadline is this Friday. So I really need anybody who's interested to sign up by the weekend, and then I can confirm our tickets. The next trip is to Wamego, Kansas on Tuesday, March 22nd. And Wamego was a suggestion from people who said, let's have some shorter day trips. So it's not quite as much endurance to get through a whole long day. And so Wamego has been on my list for a long time. They have the Oz Museum, which I thought, oh, that's such a stereotype. We've all heard the Dorothy jokes because we live in Kansas. But you know what? It's time to embrace some of those. So on our day trip to Wamego, we're going to start at Grandma Horner's, which is a large-scale manufacturing plant out in a rural setting. It's very interesting, and their story is interesting, how they came to be here in Kansas. Then we'll go by the Beecher Bible and Rifle Church, which is of course linked to our abolitionist roots here in Kansas. The surprising Columbian Theater, it's named that because of its connection to the 1893 Columbian Exhibition in Chicago, which I love those little histories. There was a wealthy banker who went to Chicago, thought it was great, and filled a train car with things to bring back to Wamego. The murals in the Columbian Theater are just amazing and have been well preserved. Then we'll have lunch right downtown Wamego, and following that, we'll go to the Oz Museum. And this is more than just the movie from 1939. There are over 2,000 artifacts, and it's a tribute to all things Wizard of Oz, starting with the original book, of course, including the 1939 movie, then the Broadway productions, and even the Michael Jackson remake. Love it or hate it, The Wizard of Oz is one of the best known American stories, and it's been read by all generations from all walks of life. So we are going to stop by and spend the afternoon there. That price for that day is $74, and it includes the bus, all of our stops, and lunch. Then we're going to Independence. I've been wanting to get to Independence since they first announced the remodel of the Truman Presidential Library, which was in 2019. Then they reopened for just a few weeks in 2020, and they got shut down again. They're now partially open to small groups who still allow for distancing, and we are on the list for now. But we're going to start the day, not at the Truman Library, but at the Vale Mansion, which when it was built in 1882 was called the most princely house and most comfortable home in the entire West. What it is still today is one of the best examples of Second Empire style architecture. So we're going to stop there. We'll have a guided tour of there. And then we're going by the Puppetry Arts Institute, because this is one of those things. Who knew this? I had no idea that the largest puppet factory in the world was in Kansas City, or in Independence, 1935 to 1975. It was run by a Kansas City businesswoman, Hazel Rollins. So we are going to spend a little time at the Puppetry Arts Institute. This puppet that's on the screen is from the Broadway play Nonsense, and the Puppetry Arts Institute designed that and was involved with the play. After lunch downtown, we will go to the Presidential Library. The $29 million update is more than just a refreshing and making the exhibits a little more interactive for the younger generation. It really is a rethinking of the legacy of President Truman. And he himself said it would take about 50 years for people to evaluate his administration. So this remodel is backed up with 75 years of research and scholarship. And it looks not only at Truman the president, but Truman the man, and how this fairly unassuming man from Missouri with not a lot of prior successes went on to become our president. So that's Independence, Missouri on Tuesday, April 5th, and it's $87 for the whole day. Then we're kind of on a roll with presidential libraries, but again, it's because they did a huge remodel. The Eisenhower Library in Abilene added 25,000 square feet of exhibitions, and then we couldn't go see it in 2020 or 2021. So we're going to go, their displays really bring Ike and Mamie more to life, using more video and images so we can hear their voices and their words. So it's a very fresh look at a career that started in wartime and then the early years of the Cold War. After lunch that day, we're going to the Heritage Center, which is the County Historical Society, but within it is the Museum of Independent Telephony or Telephony. We'll learn how the proper way to pronounce that is. And there's a small local phone company that started in that area that went on to become Sprint Telecommunications. So it's an interesting part of all of our history, and specifically in Kansas as well. Following that, we're going to have a hop-on guide from the local Arts Institute take us around to look at some of the public murals in Abilene. Public murals have been increasingly in popularity all across Kansas, but Abilene has a long history of them, and a few of them are actually interactive. So bring your camera, maybe you can get a picture of yourself with angel wings. And of course, I'm not going to drive past Russell Stover on our way home without stopping. So there will be a chocolate and comfort stop on our way out of town in Abilene. And that is Wednesday, April 27th, $94 for the whole day. And as usual, that includes all admissions, the bus, and lunch. Food and fiber is an inspiration from somebody who said, well, a lot of us learned this during COVID. You know, there's a lot of stuff nearby and we don't have to travel far. We should enjoy a little bit more of our own backyard. So the annual Kaw Valley Farm Tour in the fall has over 30 farms on it. And I decided to do sort of a mini version of that, focusing on Douglas County and really the Baldwin City area. So on Wednesday, May 11th, we're going to visit 3 farms that show kind of a variety of what's going on here. But remember, we're going to be on agriculture time. So we can say we're going on Wednesday, May 11th, but we don't know what will be happening. It'll depend on the weather. It'll depend on the seasons and how they're shifting. So this trip will be running on agriculture time, not calendar time. Our first stop is Ad Astra Alpacas. And this couple maintains a herd for breeding and improving the fleece characteristics because obviously they sell the fleece. It's a wonderful luxury fiber. They have been down to South America to meet with farmers there, and then they have helped other local farmers get started with their herds because of their breeding operation. Depending on what's going on, we might get to see the shearing process. If the shearing is done because we've had a warm spring, we'll get to spend more time actually meeting the flock and hearing about them. So dress for the barn and we'll see what we see when we get there. Then just down the road, we'll stop at South Baldwin Farms, which in the last few years has gone from a 1-acre orchard to 35 acres. They have apples, pears, blackberries, pumpkins, and have plans to nearly double the orchard again. So we're looking at small scale family owned and operated farm that's using environmentally responsible techniques, efficient growing methods, and it's kind of the counter to the corporate farming that is expanding so much in the western part of the state. And finally, we'll stop at the Blossom Trail Bee Ranch, which is a full spectrum operation. If you've been to the farmer's market in Lawrence, you've seen Richard Bean. Oftentimes he's dressed as a bee at his stand, but he doesn't just sell honey. He sells lots of honeybee products like comb honey and beeswax. He also has long been an educator for people new to beekeeping, helping them with the equipment and the process that they need to succeed. So this is just a short half day. We'll leave in the morning. We'll be back by lunchtime. And it's, again, food and fiber in Douglas County on Wednesday, May 11th, $34. Then we've got a trip for the history buffs. You can really trust the Kansas Byways program that State Tourism Department puts together, because they've done a lot of research as to what works well together and falls under a theme. The actual frontier road, the old military trail, went from Fort Leavenworth to Fort Scott, and it was used to transport troops and supplies between all these frontier forts. Our day is going to stop at 3 state historic sites. First, the Adair Cabin in Osawatomie, also known as the John Brown Cabin, where he was staying when Osawatomie was attacked and burned in 1856. It's of course interesting because it's John Brown, a big part of our history, and sometimes all that the rest of the country thinks about is John Brown in Kansas. But it's also a fascinating look at preservation techniques. Instead of trying to maintain the cabin with aging and exposure to the elements, they've kind of built a glass cage around the whole cabin. So it's standing free and in the middle of this glass presentation. We also will have a short tour. The battleground is right near the cabin, so we'll get to see that and picture where the struggle happened. Our next stop will be the Mine Creek battlefield, which was one of the largest cavalry battles of the Civil War, and one of the few battles actually fought in Kansas. We were kind of on the frontier of the Civil War, but this was actually did happen in our land, and the park ranger will give us a tour of that. Then we're on to Fort Scott, where we'll have lunch and then actually spend a day, the afternoon, touring the fort, which was started to enforce the forcing of Native Americans further west, away from their own land. But after the settlement of the permanent Indian frontier, soldiers at Fort Scott went on to escort settlers along the Santa Fe Trail. The fort was then abandoned for a while, but brought back during the Civil War, and it stayed on to protect the railroad workers that laid track to the country west of us and really joined Eastern and Western United States. If you look at Fort Scott, the story of that fort parallels the whole story of westward expansion. So that will be where we conclude our day on Tuesday, May 17th, $76 for the whole day. Then we're looking at 3 outdoor stops. I've really, during COVID, we've especially enjoyed being outside and in appreciating that natural beauty. So to go over these in chronological order, our first stop will be the KU Field Station. The field station is a research site north of town, actually north of the airport. There's over 1,800 acres there for research, environmental education, and for stewardship of the natural resources. It's an interesting location for research because it's right on the border of where the eastern deciduous forest biome ends and the tallgrass prairie biome begins. We will get to tour the study area. We'll have a short hike on the Rockefeller Prairie. There's over 5 miles of hiking trails up there, but this one along the restored prairie is paved, so anyone should be able to join us, and it's less than half a mile long. And then it's a half a mile back too. So our guide will be the station manager, and that day is Saturday, May 14th, 9:30 to 12:30. Then we're going to return to the Ivan Boyd Arboretum. Quite a few people went there this last fall because we all know the colors of the trees in Baldwin in the fall are beautiful. But that's true again in the spring because there's many native and ornamental trees in the Arboretum. So we'll be paying attention to the new leaves and to the flowering trees. John Standing will be our guide on that trip, and he'll also be the guide on Saturday, June 18th for Tree Treasures. Tree Treasures was the original tree tour that we did 8 years ago now. And it's a chance to learn about the biggest and the most beautiful trees in Lawrence. So it's a very broad look at just the big, remarkable specimens all over town. Most of this is a driving tour with a few chances to get out and take a closer look. So we'll be covering a lot of miles in Lawrence. And that's Saturday, June 18th. This is not part of our travel program, but I wanted to be able to share the forest bathing programs with people who enjoy the outdoors. Forest bathing is a very intentional time in the woods. There's a meditative quality to it. And Shannon Goras is our guide for that. She always has a well thought out program and things to consider as we spend time outdoors. And she ends it with a tea ceremony, usually brewing a plant that we have seen during the day's walk. So there's going to be one forest bathing session a month on Fridays from 1:30 to 3, and they're $20 per session or $70 for the whole series. Then back to our field trips. We're doing 2 historic field trips this spring. The first one is with Dr. Bob Dinsdale, our local history aficionado, and he is focusing on the Underground Railroad and the struggle for a voice on Saturday, April 30th. What he'll be doing is stopping for 2 places along the Underground Railroad with detailed stories about the people who lived and worked at those stops. And then we were going to go to the homes of a few of the early leaders and listen to the stories of those people. One famous one that you'll recognize and another one that should be famous, and hopefully you'll all know about them at the end of the day. That is a driving tour with a little walking. Then Oak Hill Cemetery, we're going back to visit with Jen Klein. She did our suffragist tour last fall, and this one will be focused on Black Civil War veterans. It's on Tuesday, May 31st. We'll go in the evening when any early summer heat isn't so bad, and right after Memorial Day. So the flags will still be out on the graves, and it should be a really nice evening. Her focus will be on the 46 Black Civil War veterans that are buried at Oak Hill. Some of them were part of the all-Black Independent Battery in Leavenworth, and others served in the renowned 1st and 2nd Kansas Colored Infantry. Anytime we take a tour at Oak Hill, a significant part of the fees are donated to the Friends of Oak Hill, who are working to restore and maintain not only the cemetery, but also the history of it. And then we have 2 trips that are taking us out of the local area, 2 regional trips. The first is up to Lincoln, Nebraska on April 14th and 15th. This is a trip we had planned for 2020, and we're finally going back, and happily everything that we hope to do is still there. We're pretty much going to stop all the way up getting to Lincoln. The first stop will be at the Pony Express Museum in Marysville, Kansas. And the Pony Express, of course, is a big part of American lore, even though it only ran for 18 months. But this station in Marysville is the only one that's still on its original site. And so it's going to be our first stop that day. We'll have a short tour, and then we'll have lunch in Marysville before going up to Beatrice, we'll find out which is correct, Nebraska, where we're going to go to the Homestead National Monument. Another big part of our history and the American dream was the Homestead Act, which enticed families, immigrants, women, freed slaves to cultivate over 10% of our land in a pursuit of their American dream. So we'll take an in-depth look at that part of westward expansion. And then just another hour will get us up to Lincoln, where we're going to spend the night in the Haymarket district. The Haymarket is kind of their restored river bottom area. We'll start at Licorice International, just because who knew this, but it's a premier candy store with 160 kinds of licorice from 14 different countries. And it's an interesting story about how it landed in Lincoln after being originally across from the United Nations in New York City. Then we're going to have dinner at Screamers Dining and Cabaret, where they have live musical performances from the staff as they serve us. Screamers seemed like a terrible name for a singing restaurant, but it turns out that it's based on the University of Nebraska's choral groups, the Scarlet and Cream Singers. And so Scarlet and Cream were joined for Screamers. We're actually going to spend the night in the Haymarket district. Our hotel, the Graduate, is right downtown. So after dinner, once we check in, if you want to go out and spend a little more time in the Haymarket district, you'll be welcome to. Just be ready to get up in the morning with us, because we're going to start out at the state capitol, which is one of only 4 high-rise capitals in the country. And we'll get to, if the weather allows us, we'll get to go out on the overlook, which is on the 14th floor, and gives us not only a wonderful view of Lincoln, but the prairie all around, and really get a perspective on what the flat part looks like from up there in Lincoln, Nebraska. Then we're going to the International Quilt Museum, which is the home of the largest public collection of quilts in the world. I first became aware of it when Ken Burns, the documentary filmmaker, exhibited his quilts collection up there. They generally have 4 different exhibits, so there's a real variety. I've seen quilts from India, modern quilts, traditional quilts. It's really a broad look at American craft. We'll have lunch that will be based on, I'm just going to say, some very Nebraska local items. And then in the afternoon, it's your choice. Those of you who are interested in doing behind the scenes at the Quilt Museum can stay there. And others are welcome to go just down the road, also near campus, to the Larson Tractor Test Museum. And it's one of only 2 in the whole world that is dedicated to research, safety, technology of agriculture, but also, of course, the traditions. And it was started when we first mechanized tractors, and when you were no longer pulling them with a horse or oxen, suddenly things got a lot more dangerous because of the speed. So it was designed to establish safety standards, and it's an interesting part of our history. That trip again is Thursday to Friday, April 14th and 15th. The early bird cutoff for that is March 7th, and the prices are on your handout or online. One other trip is May 5th and 6th out to Lucas and Lindsborg. I am a total nerd about folk art and these things that just pop up. One of my favorite authors, Neil Gaiman, refers to them as sacred places where people just feel the inspiration and use it to build piles of rocks or sculpt things out of car parts. And I think there's something about Western Kansas that inspires that passion and offers room for individual expression. So we're going to look at a lot of different forms of individual expression with trained artists, self-taught artists, and collectors. So starting at Lucas, we'll obviously go to the Grassroots Art Museum, which is a collection of grassroots art from around the country, but really focused on our region. And then the Garden of Eden, which was a home built completely out of concrete by a Civil War veteran. And the house itself is interesting. For example, each room has different size doors and windows with different styles of molding. But then you get out into the yard, where half the yard is an expression of his political beliefs, which you see here. And then the other half of the yard is his expression of his religious beliefs, which are equally interesting. So we'll have tours at both the Grassroots Art Museum and the Garden of Eden. And then there are 3 additional collections in town in the folk art tradition, and we'll have time on our own to explore those at your own pace. Then on our way down to Salina to spend the night, we're going to stop in Lincoln, Kansas, where there's 2 really unique and, again, passionate collections. One is Crispin's Drugstore Museum. This is run by a pharmacist who has collected memorabilia with the history of pharmaceuticals in America over the past 100+ years. And his passion is just infectious, and his collection is really unique. His wife has the Post-Rock Scout Museum in the same building, and she has memorabilia mostly from the Girl Scout Association over the past decade, but also some with Boy Scouting and Campfire Girls. And for any of us who had scouting in our background, there's going to be lots of memories triggered there. We'll spend the night in Salina, which is on the way to our second stop, Lindsborg, which is known as Little Sweden, USA. And we're going to be focused on that. It's also the home to 2 well-known artists, Birger Sandson, who taught at Bethany for years, and then Lester Raymore, who was a trained painter, but really dabbled in a lot of different media. So we'll tour an exhibit of each artist's work, and we'll have some time downtown to explore the downtown shops like the Dollar Horse Factory and a few galleries, one of which is a photographer, and I'm going to say for National Geographic magazine, who has his own gallery there. There's also one of the top international chess schools run by I'm going to forget the Russian, I want to say Karpov, is in Lindsborg. So an interesting magnet for things in Lindsborg, Kansas. really curious, historic, and just kind of amazing. It's going to describe all of our stops. And that's Lucas and Lindsborg on May 5th and 6th. If you have any questions and you're watching this on YouTube, you can always call me or email me. And if you need help with figuring out our registration, I know there's always a few glitches on the computer. Don't hesitate to call. And I cannot say how much I hope to see everybody soon and be live. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.